Back Porch Chats. The Trials of Jesus, Part 2. Now, the trials of Jesus took place on Friday morning, after they had captured Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The first two trials were by Annas, the past high priest, where they had given the okay to liquidate Jesus. The second trial was very early in the morning when it was dark also, where they gave the death sentence, the charge of blasphemy. Now, what the Jews had against Jesus was Jesus claimed to be their Messiah, which he was their Messiah. He was the Son of God. But they refused to accept that. Even the Jews today refuse to accept Jesus Christ as their Messiah. So the first two trials were done by Annas and then Caiaphas in the nighttime, which is illegal. The last trial, the Jewish trial, was done by the full Sanhedrin, which was in the daylight, which was a legal trial. So there the death sentence was made legal. Then they were taken over to the Romans. The fourth trial was done before Pilate, who was the governor of Israel, the governor from the Roman Empire. He found him not guilty. So then the Jews took him over to Herod, who was their king, and Herod found him not guilty. So they took him back then for the sixth trial. They took him back to Pilate, where again Pilate found him not guilty. Now these trials are found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In the last one or two chapters of each one of those books, you'll see that you can read about the whole trial. And all the things that Jesus said while he was on the cross comes out there also, where one time when the one man on the cross on the right side of Jesus said, "Lord, remember me," and Jesus looked at him and said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." So that man was saved just because he asked Jesus. He said, "Jesus, remember me." And the Lord said, "This day you will be with me in paradise." So I'll read John chapter 19, 5 to 11, where Jesus then came out wearing, this is after this is after Pilate had already given Jesus over to the soldiers, and they whipped him and whipped him until he was almost dead. Then they put the purple robe on him and wove a crown of thorns and pressed it down on his head. Took him back up to Pilate, and then Pilate brought him out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and that law he ought to die because he made himself to be the Son of God." Therefore when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again, and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you, and I have the authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." Then I'm going to Matthew 27:24, where Pilate saw that when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." So then in John 19:16 to 42 talks about the crucifixion, which again, it's in each one of these books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's the last one or two chapters. Now the crucifixion and burial, John 19:16 to 42. So he then handed him over to them to be crucified. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross, to the place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 other men, one on either side, and Jesus in between. Pilate also wrote an inscription, and put it on the cross. It was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Therefore many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, Do not write the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, What I have written, I have written. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, a part to every soldier, and also a tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece. So they said to one another, Let's not tear it, but cast lots for it, to decide whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture. They divided my outer garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. From that hour that disciple took her into his own household. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things had already been accomplished, to fulfill the scripture, said, I am thirsty. A jar of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the sour wine upon a branch of hyssop, and brought it up to his mouth. Therefore, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Care of the body of Jesus. Then the Jews, because it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man, and of the other who was crucified with him. But coming to Jesus, when they saw that he had already been dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you also may know, and may believe. For these things have come to pass to fulfill the scripture, not a bone of him shall be broken. And again the scripture says, They shall look on him whom they have pierced. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he could take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away the body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. Therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. And so it goes. The man that came to save the world appears to have failed. However, it's not over. In fact, it's only beginning.